When people ask me, what do you do for a living, and I tell them I make swords, they tend to respond with, wow, that's really cool, that's really neat. It can turn into a really interesting airplane conversation, let me tell you. My name is Benaiah Anderson, and I make swords. I'm an actor. I teach people how to use swords in a theatrical context for stage combat fights. I work in shows that have a lot of sword fighting. I do a lot of Shakespeare. Knowing how to use swords safely on stage is really important, and knowing how to make swords that work well and that are sturdy, that don't need a lot of maintenance and can last through an entire season of Henry V, Romeo and Juliet, things like that are important. So I've made my own swords for years now to use on stage and for use as a martial artist. I would have to say that I make swords because of the Highlander show. I saw these guys doing really cool sword fights and I wanted to do that. The combination of history and action adventure has always been appealing since I was a really little kid. So I wanted to make toy swords to play in the backyard, in the barn, swinging on ropes and trees, that kind of thing. I started making swords out of wood. I would just get a piece of lath from an old construction project my dad had, spray paint it silver, nail a little cross guard on it, wrap the handle with electrical tape, and then I had my first swords. So I ended up in Colorado because two people that I really wanted to work with, to train under, lived here. Jeffrey Kent, a fight director in Denver, and Dennis Graves, a sword maker in Boulder. I got an opportunity to meet Dennis Graves in 2000 and started training with him to learn how a sword should go together and how the parts should fit and how to make that piece look like something from a museum from the right time period. There are several different approaches to making a sword. You have to have a good blade to start with. Some people will make their own blades, make their own hilts, make their own handles, and do every single piece of that sword themselves. Dennis Graves and I are simple cutlers where we'll order blades from reputable manufacturers and we will fit those blades to a grip and a tang and a pommel. And we've forged a few of our own, but for the most part I mount blades that I buy. I'll put a good handle and a guard on a blade that already exists. So I'll start with sort of an almost full-size drawing on graph paper, and I'll start to trace out on that paper how I want the end result, how I want it to look. After I've traced a design on graph paper, I get a pretty good idea of the full dimensions. For example, if I want a 10-inch wide crossguard or hilt, then I will take that tracing, lay it onto my piece of metal, my bar stock, trace around that piece of paper, and then cut out the material with the bandsaw, shape it with a grinder, center drill the holes where they need to be so that that piece of metal, that crossguard, will then fit down the tang. The next phase, will be fitting the handle on. The handle has to lock up solidly to that crossguard, and then the pommel, the counterweight, locks it all together from the bottom. So whether that pommel threads or whether we thread a nut to put on the end of the tang, all of those pieces, those three very important pieces, crossguard, grip, and pommel, have to lock together with no vibration. Vibration is the enemy of a good sword. My favorite swords to make are called long swords. It's a two-handed sword. Generally the blade is around 3 feet long and the handle is around 8 or 10 inches long. And you can use them in one hand, but generally they're used with both hands on the blade. I think a good sword maker should pay a lot of attention to detail. I think a good sword maker should have good customer service, should deal with the customers really well, answer their questions, and help them get a sword that they want. I think that you should have an interest in history and an interest in how the sword would be used historically. I think a sword maker is benefited by taking a martial arts class. See how your sword is going to be used by people who will use it and abuse it, then you understand how to make it better. My favorite part about the sword making process, the part that makes me the most excited, is the final fitting before I rivet the pommel on. All the pieces lock down, everything fits, and it starts ringing. That's my favorite part of sword making, when that piece sings back to me.